All right, so this recording is ultimately the recording for the Sunday, 31 December 2023 broadcast that is usually held on a Sunday evening at 1900, which usually starts 5 minutes before, or at least for 5 minutes before the actual start of the net. The check-ins are held on the Rudderpoort repeater. And of course, just to remind everybody that the net is broadcast every Sunday evening starting at 1900. And it is broadcast for the benefit of radio amateurs, disaster relief cert volunteers, and members of the general public. So that now being said, you know, normally Zoom would be open, and this is a recording after the fact. And therefore, Zoom is no longer open, but usually it is. And we're going to skip the normal introduction and just move on with this week's topic. Now, usually we do the COVID-19 figure unpacking, which is made available by the World Health Organization. But due to the festive season this week, I must admit, no figures from the World Health Organization. So globally, the last set of figures was 772,838,745 cases, with 6,988,679 deaths worldwide. Diphtheria, no updates. Mpox this week again from the NICD, from the website, is also not updated, and last reported 13 December at 92,976. Then moving on to measles, the NICD hasn't posted any reports. So our last figure on the measles was at 1,338 for the 12th of December. And rubella as well, no further updates on that. And there we were, looking at a total 893 cases. Also around about the 13th or so of December. Now, that being said, I want to move on with part 5, and this is probably going to be one of the longer broadcasts. I want to move on with part 5 of the International Humanitarian Law blog document that I've been quoting from, dated the 2nd of November 2023. And of course, last week I stopped at the creation of space debris. Does not only concern the principle of proportionality, the prohibition on indiscriminate attacks, and the principle of precautions as subsequently discussed, but also other rules of international humanitarian law, notably the rules protecting the natural environment, such as Articles 35.3 and 55.1 of the additional first protocol, which is also covered under customary international humanitarian law rules 43, 44, and 45, and the Articles 1 and 2 on the Convention on the Prohibition of Military and any hostile use of environmental modification techniques. So in terms of this particular document, on how international humanitarian law is involved and affected in space. This week, I want to continue with the principle of precaution, which reads as follows. And of course, this document is an ICRC, or International Committee of the Red Cross document in particular. And of course, is and can be found at https://blogs.icrc.org/law and policy /IHL-apply-in-outer-space. So yeah, that was quite a long URL. And of course, the document is headed and titled, "How would international humanitarian law apply to hostilities in outer space?" So that is the document that we are currently working from. And as I say, that's the document that we are busy quoting from, which I will continue with the quote. So when an attack is launched, precautionary measures are required of both the attacking party and the party being attacked in order to avoid, or at least to minimize, the incidental civilian harm. In other words, the principle of precaution entails obligations to take precautionary measures in attack and against the effects of an attack. This means parties to armed conflict must take constant care to spare the civilian population, civilians, and civilian objects when conducting military operations. And again, from the first additional protocol, Article 57.1, and customary IHL Rule 15. Now, among the precautionary measures required before and during an attack, measures relating to the choice of means and methods of warfare. The articles from AP1 is Article 57.2A2 and customary IHL Rule 17. The assessment and the effects of the attack, Article 57.2A3 from the first additional protocol, and the customary IHL Rule 18, and the target selection. So there's a couple of things that need to be taken into account there. And of course, the target selection falls under AP1 or the additional protocol, first additional protocol, Article 57.3, customary international humanitarian law 21 are particularly relevant. So regarding, I'll continue with the quote, regarding which part of the dual-use space object can be targeted, in line with the above stated obligations, whenever feasible, means and methods of warfare, be they kinetic or non-kinetic, that effect only the parts of the space structure, such as a payload or communication linked for military purposes, and is not the satellite bus or any other payloads for civilian use, must be chosen to avoid or at least minimize incidental civilian harm. If it is, however, not feasible to attack the military payload separately, nor to select another target, such as the downlink communication or ground segment of the satellite system, solely used for military purposes, to achieve a similar military advantage while causing less danger to civilian lives and to civilian objects, an attack on the satellite bus as a military objective would be permissible after a thorough proportionality analysis, as pointed out above. The debris created by such an attack needs to be analyzed with regards to the above stated duty as well. The principle of precaution in this regard is even further strengthened by the due regard principle enshrined in Article 9 of the OST, which obligates states to carefully balance their interest with the consequences of its activities in space and the interests of other neutral states using space. This arguably leads to the obligation to at least minimize the creation of space debris as far as possible. Now, read in conjunction with the IHL principle of precaution, a thorough analysis of the possible and feasible means and methods of the attack is necessary before destroying a space asset. And it could be argued that parties to the conflict are obliged to employ those means and methods first that create no, or at least amount to, let me rephrase that, methods first that create no or the least amount of space debris. Example, a cyber operation before using kinetic counterspace capabilities. A further challenging question linked to the dual use of space systems is whether militaries are even allowed to use civilian space systems to conduct or support military activities during armed conflicts in the first place. Now, in light of the principle of precautions against the effects of attacks, that's passive precautions, this principle establishes an obligation for parties to the conflict to take all feasible precautions to protect the civilian population and civilian objects under their control against the effects of attacks. That now comes from the first additional protocol, Article 58C, and the customary international humanitarian law 22. Among the measures to implement this obligation, Article 58A of the first additional protocol obligates parties to the conflict to the maximum extent feasible to remove civilian objects under their control from the vicinity of military objectives. See also customary international humanitarian law 24. I would imagine it provides a little bit more additional information. The particular, I'll continue with the quote, the particular and feasible precautionary measures are always contextually determined. It could be argued that planning and preparation for such preparations must be taken in peacetime. Now, does this imply the use of dual-use objects in an armed conflict is unlawful? While it is clear that taking precautions against the effects of attacks is a legal obligation rather than a mere recommendation, the term "to the maximum extent feasible" indicates that armed forces cannot be required to do the objectively impossible, but must act in good faith to take every precaution that is practicable or practically possible, taking into account all circumstances ruling at the time, including humanitarian and military considerations. The use of commercial space systems for military purposes is a long-established practice that cannot be changed easily and is further necessitated by the extremely high cost that come with the operation of space systems during all phases. And that is, of course, development, construction, launch, operation in space, and deorbiting. The widespread practice of dual-use systems is owed to this financial burden. Thus, one could argue that it is neither practical nor practicably possible to completely separate military space systems from civilian ones in order to carry out military activities during armed conflicts. All right, so coming to the end, let's have a look at the final statements in the conclusion. And the author of this particular document states in conclusion, it is a fact that international law, including international humanitarian law, applies to outer space. The specific characteristics of space pose challenges to the application of the principles of IHL governing the conduct of hostilities to military operations in, from, to, or through outer space in the context of an armed conflict, especially with regard to the relationship between commercial space actors and military activities in space, as well as the inevitable creation of space debris when destroying or physically damaging a space object. In today's strategic environment, states and militaries urgently need to address those challenges with a view to avoiding, in any event, minimizing the civilian harm due to hostilities involving outer space. A thorough interpretation and careful analysis of the core principles of IHL is necessary, with the experiences, interpretations, and thresholds gained in the traditional domains over the last decades. All right, so that basically brings us to the end of our subject, which was how would international humanitarian law apply to hostilities in outer space. And with the way that the world is going at the moment, there's more and more space activity and communication and imagery and everything else, and the reliance on GPS and such features that are available. And again, this is not an easy subject to cover or even discuss, and it does take a fair bit of legal expertise, number one, but also a more thorough and in-depth understanding of not only international law, but international humanitarian law in particular, specifically when it comes to the Geneva Conventions and the additional protocols. And on that basis, personally speaking, I know a lot of people will have plenty comments to make, and have made plenty comments to the various wars that have been that we have seen and witnessed over the last decade in particular throughout the world. And there's plenty of comments and statements being made and accusations and everything else. However, at the end of the day, this is not a simple cut and dry situation that can be dealt with just at face value. And what makes it even more difficult is the fact that the custodian of international humanitarian law, in other words, the International Committee of the Red Cross, who are mandated to, in actual fact, relate to and be involved with all the parties that are involved in a conflict. They are the ones that need to, in actual fact, be the ones to sit down on a neutral and impartial basis and raise any international humanitarian law contraventions that people and ICRC delegates in particular may in actual determine or establish or witness or be concerned about. And ICRC, unfortunately, are in no position to actually categorically stand up and claim Party A or Party B to the conflict has in actual fact contravened international humanitarian law, because then it would put them in a position whereby they could be accused of taking a side of one party or another. And it is their humanitarian duty to actually raise these concerns with the parties concerned privately. That's behind closed doors and with the leaders of those parties, and to bring about the education and awareness creation that is required in terms of international humanitarian law. And the other personal comment I want to make in closing before ending this series is to appeal to those that actually do comment regarding what is going on with regards to contraventions of international humanitarian law, especially when it comes to, either genocide or war crimes, crimes against humanity, whichever way one wants to term it, to declare or term it, I should say, that statements like this should be considered very carefully before being posted, as they do tend to incite others to violence. And I think as communities, as responsible human beings, we should be very careful in terms of the statements we may make, especially on public platforms, that type of thing, in order to avoid the potential risk of inciting others to violence. This is how you will normally find that one conflict within a particular geographical location is quickly and spread to other, sort of countries or even regions within the area surrounding the conflict. And before we know it, we've actually got ourselves a full-blown world war. And I think we've seen that at the moment, even though it's not declared a world war, but, we've got many countries that are involved in what this has been termed the war in Gaza. And of course, now the Red Sea has to be protected and everything else. And globally, there are protests, and, there's a lot of things that are happening around the world as a result of one incident. and especially due to a lot of the phrases and terminology that have been put out there. So, it wasn't as bad when Ukraine and Russia declared war on each other and entered into a war. But this round with Gaza in particular, it's really sparked a lot of emotion and sentiment and feelings. And like any war, the catastrophic effect that it has on human lives and populations, regardless of which side of the party line you actually stand on, the catastrophic implication is beyond any normal way of life, and how people are impacted. And this is where the compassion and empathy and everything else needs to come into play. So having gone through this very, very thorough document, nicely laid out, covering various aspects, I'd like to close off the series. And of course, as I say, this document and final episode was planned for the 31st of December 2023. And I am actually recording it this on the morning of the 1st of January 2024. And therefore, I'd like to wish all those that are in actual fact watching and have followed this series, I'd like to wish you a blessed and prosperous year for 2024. May it be a better year than 2023, most definitely. And I think the blessings that are required across the board must be taken into account. So finally, in closing, I'd just like to encourage everyone to register as a disaster relief cert volunteer and to prepare and train to assist local communities for when disaster strikes. As COVID the pandemic hasn't actually come to an end, I'd still like to remind everybody to please remember to physically distance yourselves and to wear a mask to protect others, especially the elderly who could lose their lives if infected with COVID-19. And also remember that it's always best to sanitize or wash your hands on a regular basis in any event. Doing so will also assist in stopping the spread of other respiratory diseases as well. So for the week moving forward, be safe, be prepared, and of course, be happy. This is ZS6 OPS bidding you farewell. And of course, my disaster relief cert call sign is Echo 1. So Echo 1 out. Cheers. Have a good one.